To begin with, I need to say who I am, primarily because there has been a lot of politics injected into science these days. And so I am simply a geologist with 50 years of expertise and research in global climate change. I am a scientist. I'm not political. I don't have any particular bias towards either party, so I have no political agenda. I'm not associated with or funded by any business group. I'm not a shill for big oil, big coal, big anybody. All of my research has been funded by governmental agencies. And I'm currently working actively with an international group of geologists, atmospheric physicists, meteorologists, astrophysicists, oceanographers, and sea level experts, and other sciences in various parts of the world. You know, that's where I'm coming from. I thought I might start by listing some things that you probably don't know about or haven't heard about because the news media isn't telling you. And I've listed a few of them here. There are a lot more, but some things that I will touch on later in the presentation. And that is that global warming ended in 1998. That may come as a surprise, but I'll show you the data for it. And it is indeed true, and that has been admitted by the chairman of the UN group that has been pushing CO2 as causing climate change. Even he admits there's been no global warming in 15 years. The Antarctic ice sheet is not melting. Contrary to headlines you'll see about every other day that the Antarctic ice sheet is melting at an accelerating rate. It not only is not melting at an accelerating rate, it's not melting at all. The main ice sheet, and I'll show you the data for this, is in fact growing, not melting. So we don't need to fear that the ice caps are going to suddenly melt and cause all kinds of problems for us, because they aren't. Sea level has been rising globally and also locally at a rate of about 7 inches per century, as we're thawing out from a little ice age which occurred about 500 years ago. And the projections of anywhere from 5 feet to 20-foot rise of sea level, as you'll see when I present the data, is beyond reality. Snowfall is not below normal. For the past 5 years, have set snowfall records, both globally and in the Cascades. CO2 cannot possibly cause global warming. That will come as a shock to you, I'm sure. And the reason is that there's so little of it. It is a trace gas. It has increased in its atmospheric content by only 1/1000ths of 1%. If you double nothing, you still get nothing. And I'll comment more about this later. When we get a big snowstorm in the east, they say, oh, it's because of global warming. When we hear about a hurricane on the East Coast, they say it's because of global warming. It isn't. And I will show you data that shows that actually the extreme events, severe storms, are actually declining. They're not becoming more frequent. And finally, you may be surprised to know that the oceans are not acid. There's nothing new about global warming. It goes on all the time. It has been going on for thousands of years at much higher rates, much more intense for longer periods of time than we've experienced in the last period of global warming since CO2 began to be elevated. 20 periods of global warming and global cooling that have occurred in the past 500 years, none of which could possibly have been caused by CO2 because CO2 had not begun to rise until 1945. If we go back even farther, if we go back 10,000 years, look how much of the last 10,000 years the temperatures have been higher than they are now. Almost all of the last 10,000 years, except for the period beginning about 1,300 years ago, almost all of that, the temperatures on Earth were actually warmer than they are right now. Warming is nothing new. As a matter of fact, it's the norm for the last 10,000 years. The blue periods here are from the Little Ice Age, which was a period of global cooling that occurred from about 900 AD and may still be going on for all we know. So what about all the claims that temperatures are warmer now than they have ever been? These are patently not true. And those claims come from manipulation of data. Here is the real original data. The hottest year of record, number one for the number of, this is the number of temperature records that were broken. Number one is 1936. Everybody has acknowledged that 1936 was the warmest year of this century, until NOAA and NASA began to manipulate the old data and made it cooler. And then they elevated the recent temperature, made them warmer, and so they come up with a headline saying, oh, it's warmer now than it was then. This is the original data before they manipulated it. I'm showing you the original data, and what you're looking at is the data that has been tampered with by NOAA and by NASA, and I could show you curves of what that data looked like in 1936, what it looked like in 1980, what it looked like in 1990 and 2000, and the temperatures, the high temperatures in the 1930s get cooler every year. They put out a new issue, and the temperatures that are in the 2000 plus get warmer because they have frankly tampered with the data. That's the difference between what you're looking at and what I'm looking at. Mine is the original data.
It's hard for me to believe that, and I was just wondering, what would be the motivation that they would have to manipulate temperature data? Why do you think that?
I have no idea. I have no idea what people are thinking. What I can tell you with absolute certainty is that I have seen the original data that was collected at many places, and then I have seen that same data graphed by NASA, by NOAA, and by the CDDC, which is an arm of NASA, in 1980, and it was different. And I saw it again in, I don't know, 1990, 2000, and it was different yet. And I saw it again in 2000 and something or other, and it was different yet, and each case higher. So I'll let you draw your own conclusions for that. I have no idea about motivation or anything else. I'm not a mind reader. All I can tell you is what I observe, and that is well documented. The heat wave index for 1936 is right here. And look at the period of 1930, 1940 relative to where we are now. The drought this summer, last summer, was bad. There's no doubt about it. It cost a lot of farmers a lot of money, but it wasn't in any way unusual. So what happened to global warming? I mentioned earlier that global warming stopped in 1998. And my guess is you probably have never heard that, because the press will not print anything which is adversely related in any way to CO2 as a cause of a climate change. But here's the real data. The top two here are satellite measurements compared to ground measurements, which are these lower three colors right here. And you can see the shape of the curve is essentially the same. So the ground data and the satellite data essentially agree that we have indeed had global cooling for the last decade or two. That's the trend. It's getting colder at a rate of about 4 degrees. Another plot of that same sort of thing, again showing the green line here, cool is down, warm is up. So again showing a cooling trend since about 2001. And all the while this is going on, we hear in the headlines that global warming is accelerating and it's getting hotter and hotter, and in fact it's getting cooler and cooler. Here are winter temperatures for the past decade, and they range all the way from about 2 in the Pacific Northwest, -2 to -3 in the Southeast. All of them, however, are colder.
Is this a conspiracy?
I'm not into conspiracy, so I have no comment on that. I'm simply a data purveyor, so I'm going to present you with data, and you can draw your own conclusions. You probably didn't realize that Europe is having the coldest winter in 100 years. I hadn't heard that, and I started looking up the data. The Central European area, Germany, Poland, Russia, Norway, Sweden, and also Great Britain. This area is having the bitterest, snowiest, coldest winter in 100 years. You'll never see this on TV. So the conclusion is that global warming ended in 1998, and by that I mean modern, which is the warm period that everybody agrees on occurred between 1978 and 1998. There's been no global warming in 15 years. The temperatures have not exceeded those in 1998. And the global warming that took place between 1978 and 1998 has been replaced by global cooling for the past decade, despite the fact that CO2 continues to rise. And most of the last 10,000 years has been warmer than it is right now. There have been times when it was warmer and you could sail ships across the Arctic Ocean. The Chinese did it in 1420s. And we hear a lot about the polar bears who are in trouble because the sea ice is melting. But what I can tell you is that the polar bear population has gone from 5,000 to 25,000 during that same period when the sea ice was supposed to be melting. And they survived 10,000 years of climate warmer than today, so they're going to be just fine. This is the Antarctic ice sheet. It's about 15,000 feet thick at its thickest point. Temperatures there are exceedingly cold. I'll show you those in a moment. There's a little arm right here called the West Antarctic Peninsula that has warm water around it, which has been melting some of the floating ice there in recent years and causing some glacial melt. But this is a minuscule part of the total volume of ice that occurs on account of Antarctica. And the reason is that you would have to warm Antarctica 100 degrees to melt the Antarctic ice cap. How likely do you think that is? Antarctic ice cap has not disappeared in 15 million years, despite temperatures considerably warmer than we have today.
How about glaciers? Because I've seen the empirical evidence of glaciers melting. So do you disagree with that evidence, or do you think that it's something other than warming that's causing that?
No, and warming, certainly, I agree with that totally. And what I have said from the beginning is that we've had a number of periods of warming, cooling, and the answer to the question is during periods of warming, of course they melt. During times of cooling, they advance, they grow. So what I'm saying is, yes, global warming causes glaciers to melt. That doesn't prove what's causing it. I mean, hell, I had hair before global warming. I don't make a cause and effect connection there, and you can't make a cause and effect connection just because CO2 happened at the same time to go up at the same time that the climate warmed. Because in all these earlier periods, there was no CO2 factor, and it still got warmer. From 1880 to 1915, glaciers advanced to almost their maximum position, certainly in the last several hundred years. They advanced. From 1915 to 1945, they retreated like crazy at a rate probably greater than the last decade. And then in 1945, the climate got cooler, and they advanced again. And they advanced to positions that were actually down valley in many cases from their earlier ones. And then it got warm again from 1978 to 1998, and it began to retreat again. And then since 1998, many of the glaciers have stopped retreating, and some are starting to advance. This is true in Alaska, it's true in Scandinavia, true in some parts of South America, but not every glacier behaves the same way, so not every glacier has stopped melting. This black curve here is a curve that I took as is from the official IPCC website in the year 2000. This is what their projection was in the year 2000. It actually continues on down here a ways, but I don't have it on this curve. And they were predicting that the temperature between 2000 and 2010 was going to be increased by 1 full degree, a 1 degree warming, which is greater than the warming for the entire century. That's what they were predicting in a decade. Here is the actual record, which is the satellite record that we've already seen, and look at the gap between the two. The models failed miserably. They weren't even close. Therefore, what trust can you put in models if they cannot even predict 10 years down the line within 1 degree? They're useless. Here's a critical question. Is CO2 capable of causing global warming? That's what underlies all of these discussions. What you may not be aware of is that there's almost no CO2 in the atmosphere. It's very small. It's 39 1/1000ths of 1%. You can triple that and you still have nothing. There is not enough CO2 in the atmosphere to do much of anything. And then you add to that CO2 accounts for only 3.6% of the greenhouse effect. Only 3% of the greenhouse gas effect is CO2. 95% is water vapor. I'll say it again. CO2 by itself is incapable of causing significant global warming. And so how do we get these projections in? And we get it because the climate modelers who depend on computer models rather than real data for their conclusions have decided that if CO2 goes up, water vapor will also increase. And as water vapor increases, we kick in this 95% of the greenhouse effect. So virtually all of the temperature increase during the warm period we had in 77 to 98, virtually all of that they would account for by water vapor in their models, not CO2, water vapor. The maximum amount of temperature change you could get from the increase in CO2 from 1950, when the whole thing started to escalate for emissions, and now is less than 1/10 of a degree. This is basic physics. The idea would be that if CO2 is causing global warming, CO2 would go up, and then the temperature would go up, okay? But here's what actually happens, and these are measurements that have been made by a group of researchers in Norway. In every case, temperature goes up, and then CO2 follows. How about sea level? Let's take a quick look at sea level. The poster child of rising sea level is the Maldives Islands, and you're going to see a big program on TV about how the poor people in the Maldives are going to be drowning, and they're going to have to move the entire nation. A world-renowned sea level expert decided to go see for himself what was really there, and what he found was this, that in this picture, for example, this is the 1979 shoreline right here. This is where the sea level was in 1979. Here's where it is now. Here's another place. This is where the sea level was in 1979. Here's where it is now. The irony is that the Maldives are emerging from the oceans, not sinking. How much is sea level changing? We've been thawing out from the Little Ice Age, which was about 500 years ago, and temperatures have been rising during that period at a rate of about 0.8 of a degree a century, no doubt about it. They've been rising at a rate in the early days about 1.5 millimeters a year. That's about the thickness of your fingernail per year. You wouldn't be aware of it. So the total sea level rise in the past century is about 6 inches, not that much. In our lifetimes, it wouldn't rise enough we'd even be aware of it. Seattle has a really good sea level record, tidal gauge record. This is relative sea level, so we start here in about 1900, and we have records then that go all the way. In this case, they end about 2003 or 2004, and they could be extended. But here's the rate of rise. It's about 7 inches per century. The global sea level is rising at about 8 inches a century. That's clear. So here's the curve of sea level from 1993. This is measured up to where we are right now. And if you project that into the future, you get a sea level rise by 2100 of about 7 inches. Not going to be a problem. Here is what the UN agency is predicting. This is their lower estimate. This is their higher estimate. And they're predicting somewhere by 2100, 5 to 20 feet. Look how this curve, the UN curve, varies from reality. In order to get the sea level rise like this, you'd have to melt the Antarctic ice cap. And we've already seen that's not going to happen.
Thousands of scientists worked on this and came to the conclusion that climate change is real and it's human caused. How do you account for all of those folks saying that, and it's obviously very different than what you're presenting to us today?
Could I answer that in just a moment with a slide?
Of course.
I can show you
Yeah.
I can show you the data, and you will be surprised at the answer, I think. Okay.
Thank you.
I see every day quoted 97% of all scientists believe that man-made CO2 causes global warming. That's a fraudulent statement. And let me tell you where this number comes from, and let me tell you where that oft-quoted statement comes from. There was a graduate student who sent out 10,257 questionnaires to climate scientists. He got 3,146 back responses. Of those, he selected either 77 or 79, I'm not quite sure the numbers, it doesn't matter, that he handpicked out of these 3,000 responses. And he asked those people, do you think CO2 is causing climate change? And funny thing, all but 2 said yes, because they were hand-selected. And so the real number is that there were 77 or 75 scientists out of 30,100, not out of 77 or 79. So if you divide this number over that number, you get 2%. So the consensus that you're hearing is 2%, not 98%. If you were to then look at, well, what is the consensus? This was a petition And let me read what the statement says. It says, there is no convincing scientific evidence that human release of carbon dioxide, methane, or other greenhouse gases is causing or will in the foreseeable future cause catastrophic heating of the Earth's atmosphere and disruption of the Earth's climate. How many scientists who have degrees in one of the sciences signed that? And the answer is 31,487. As opposed to the 77 in this survey that's so oft quoted. So I would say the consensus is that scientists do not believe that CO2 is causing global warming, not the other way around. These are real scientists, and there are 31,000 of them. And there are about 4,000 people who were involved in the IPCC project, and by admission of the chairman of the IPCC for the UN, 80% of those are non-scientists. So there's the answer to your question.
The overwhelming majority of scientific papers, peer-reviewed, showed either that had a consensus about climate change being human-caused, and a few that came to no conclusion, but very few that came to the opposite conclusion. So I guess I'm just having a little trouble that you're saying that that number is based on just that one methodology, when I think there are other methodologies to arrive at what the scientific consensus is.
Your statement could be true, but let me tell you why it could be true. And that is that the editorial boards of virtually every scientific journal, probably in the world, but certainly in the United States, the Geological Society of America, the American Geophysical Union, Science, Nature, all of these places, will not even read a paper that has anything negative to say about CO2. So it's not surprising that there are no papers published that are critical of CO2 as a cause, because their editorial boards will not permit it. And that is a fact, and there are some numbers that go with that. I don't happen to have them handy, but it's clear that the peer review process, the editorial process, has been taken over by what I call CO2 dogmatists who will not permit publication of anything that's in any way critical of CO2, and that's a fact. The allegation is that because there's more CO2 in the atmosphere, that's going to put more CO2 in the oceans. And at the same time, they're saying that CO2 is causing it to become warmer. At the present time, we've already looked at these numbers. The amount of CO2 in the atmosphere the change is so small, 1/1000th of 1% changed in the atmosphere. And the volume of the oceans is about 300 million cubic miles. And we're going to change that from a strongly alkaline solution to an acid with this 1/1000th of 1% change in CO2. Not possible. There aren't enough CO2 atoms in the atmosphere to do that. And in fact, just the opposite is happening. As you saw earlier, the effect of global warming is to make the oceans more alkaline, not more acidic, because warming drives CO2 out of the oceans. Even though there's more CO2 in the atmosphere, because the temperature is warmer, the ocean is giving up CO2, not taking it in. It's a CO2 that makes carbonic acid that makes it less alkaline or tending toward more acidic. So with less CO2 in the oceans, it's not as acidic. It's as simple as that. The chemistry 101, does not add up to the claim that the oceans are becoming acid.